And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning with me, your host, Black Box Ned, coming to you every Tuesday and Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the summer and the autumn of terror. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment here on Black Box Online Radio where I can talk about multiple subjects within a single episode. And because today is Tuesday, you guys can say hello to Snoopy over here. And it looks like we have some people in the chat already. We have Jerome from Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. He says, hi, Ned. Hi, everybody. Hello to you too, Jerome. Mike is here. Hello, Mike. How's it going? Dark Side of the Moon says, Ned, Jerome, and Mike. Hello. Hello to you too, Dark Side of the Moon. Ed Edwards Cypher says, that's a fast turnaround. I'm not sure if you're talking to me or somebody in the chat, Ed Edwards Cyphers. But out of curiosity, Ed Edwards Cyphers, that is, have you read the book 55, The Zodiac Killer Identified by Tim Spencer? That's one that's always been on my reading list. Maybe I'll do a future Zodiac Monday episode about that. Yes, every Monday I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer. Cowpoke is here, says, hello all, and Casbah says, good morning. Everybody, welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Now, I'm going to begin with something that's a little bit different for this channel. There is a book out there called Prison to Purpose that tells some stories of West Virginia true crime. I'm a West Virginian, of course, and this book talks about dealing with crimes that are related to alcohol, because it was written by somebody who was a star high school athlete who got in trouble with the bottle, but it was talking about how the system enabled him to become an alcoholic and ultimately getting into a DUI car accident that led to the death of an elderly man, and he ended up spending 3 years in prison. But this book talks about how he had his first beer at 12 years old. But then there's a chapter in the book called My First Trip to the Bar, and the bar is a place that he called the ISS. In West Virginia, we had this thing called ISS, which means in-school suspension. And I've talked to people from other states, and they have similar variants of this. And this was where you pretty much do an all-day detention. They call it a suspension, but you're actually in school. It's more or less an all-day detention room. And he said that he would get drunk during this all-day detention thing, the ISS. And because he was not only an athlete, but the star athlete of his high school, the teachers allowed him to. They even encouraged him to do it. And by the time he was a teenager, he was a functioning athlete. And some of you might be thinking about how this really isn't the normal type of story that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio. The reason why is this guy put this into his book, Prison to Purpose, because he said that it was a story that he thought was unbelievable, but he had experienced it himself. And he was like, it's the truth, and I wanted to put the truth out there. And that's the stuff that I truly get into here on Black Box Online Radio, because all of you guys in the chat, have you ever had that experience where you've experienced something firsthand and you tell people about it and they either don't believe you, or even worse, they don't understand you. They don't understand how that could be possible, or they think that you've either misunderstood the story or your perception of the situation, your perception of reality was somehow incorrect. Well, this guy's just saying, hey, yeah, I became an alcoholic because my teachers in school, in detention, told me that it was okay to drink when I was in school and in detention. And ultimately, the book is about, turning his life around and so on. More power to that guy. But there are several different things that I would like to go through in this episode here. I've been following the YouTube channel Radio Reddit quite a bit, and they do a lot of stories about confessions. People are able to share their secrets anonymously, and they also just share stories of personal experience where someone doesn't necessarily want to be anonymous, but rather they just want to put out their story in a way when they aren't going to be judged. The whole concept of put a mask on somebody and they will tell you the truth. Maybe you've heard that expression. And on one episode of Radio Reddit, they were talking about how, do you ever hear these stories about serial killers, or about even people who are not serial killers and murderers, but just abusers in relationships? And when everybody learns the truth, what? This guy? No way, not him. He wouldn't do something like that, right? Well, what this post said on Radio Reddit was that some people have very specific targets. And in fact, I think that most serial killers are like this. It's called a victim profile, right? They are targeting a specific type of person. And with someone who's in an abusive relationship, the abuser is also targeting a specific type of person. So they might not be doing anything hostile or aggressive to the other people. They might actually only do this to the person whom they've chosen as their specific target. And this is why it creates this air of non-threatening behavior, this aura of non-threatening behavior around everybody else, especially with a lot of these serial killers who are coming from educated backgrounds. There are also people who are coming from professional backgrounds who go on to be serial killers and other types of criminals, and they're just absolutely shocked when they learn the truth. By they, I mean their families, their coworkers, their circles of friends are just absolutely shocked when they learn the truth. And I did an episode once on True Crime Talk Radio called The Serial Killer Life Code that was looking at all of these similarities and differences between serial killers and people who are in abusive relationships. And in all seriousness, I don't think that I don't really think there are too many differences psychologically. It just appears that the people who are serial killers just have more intense predatory instincts, more vicious instincts than the people who are in abusive relationships. But they share the commonality that they both want to hurt people, or at the very least, they both want to inflict a certain amount of pain on people to create domination. Now, we have some other things here in the chat. Cowpoke says hi to Snoopy. Hey, Cowpoke, Snoopy says hi to you too as well. Ed Edward Cipher says, fast turnaround was for you, and no, I won't be reading that. Well, your name is Ed Edward Ciphers. You're not going to be reading the book that's about Ed Edwards as a Zodiac killer. Now, Ed Edward Ciphers, as you guys know, I try to pay attention to everything, and I've seen you in the chat on some other threads when you've been talking about how reading Ed Edwards' autobiography was right. You read that one, right, and you found some good info? But sure, please share anything you want in the comment section. I would love to read it. Cowpoke says Pruny Town. My high school called it the Hole. Oh, okay, yes. These are variants of the kind of in-school suspension that people had in other parts of the country. You just called it the Hole. It's something that I think is going to have different names. We called it ISS, in-school suspension, and I'm sure the Hole is a nickname that you have. But I mean, in the United Kingdom, sometimes it's called the Cooler or something like that. Ed Edwards says, it's like you're directly talking to me. Absolutely, I am. Every Tuesday and Thursday. And Mr. JSV is here. Hey, Mr. JSV, I guess you're saying happy autumn. All right, you got a cheers from Snoopy. Happy autumn to you, too. Charlie says, hello, they don't want to create pain and dominate and isolate. Oh, wow, I totally misread you, Charlie. Hello, they want to create pain and dominate and isolate. Yes, right, but with very specific people. Because with a lot of serial killers, you're going to see that they have this type of victim profiling where they might do this in a sexually motivated way. How many times have you heard of a serial killer that is only targeting women who are adult females that look a certain way? Ted Bundy was called the lady killer for a reason, and it's for that exact concept that he is just targeting these women who look a certain way that resembled his ex-girlfriend Stephanie Brooks. And this is going to tie into something else that's very, very important to understand when we're looking at the behaviors of serial killers, because Ted Bundy felt rejected by Stephanie Brooks, and rejection and humiliation drive people to go on and commit other crimes. So that's just one example of somebody who has a victim profile. Now, recently I appeared on Jerome's channel, Mysteries with Mr. Belchique, on Saturday, talking about the Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans is an unidentified serial killer from, well, 1910 to 1919. Let's just say that. We don't truly know. Could be more, could be less. And there is a crime that was committed by the Axeman of New Orleans called the Cordemelia murders, where a husband, wife, and the baby were all attacked. And in that instance, you would see somebody who is not exactly following a specific victim profile, because normally the Axeman of New Orleans didn't target children, but he did murder the baby, Mary Cordemelia, rest in peace to her. And I just think that that was a case of somebody caught in the crossfire. Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, was all about this because he would commit murders almost as a way to subdue people. And I think a very clear example of this is the murders of the Maggioris, of Brian and Katie Maggiore, where the Golden State Killer targeted them because, or he murdered them because he thought that they could be witnesses. Mr. Flack Nasty says, "Morning, Ned and Snoop. Top of the morning from Humboldt County. We send love." And Snoopy says, "Love to you too, Mr. Flack Nasty. Are you in Humboldt County, California, just asking, or is there a different Humboldt County?" I often think of Humboldt State College or University when I see that name. Oh, and the Humboldt River, of course. The Humboldt River might be in Nevada too, right? And we have Mike here saying, "I was a good kid, so I don't know anything about ISS. Even I got sent to ISS once. It happens." Oh, I was not a good kid, mind you. I was not a good kid. I was a bad kid. But here's the issue, and this is something that I relate to when I watch true crime documentaries, and they just say those things. "What? How could he have done this? There were no warning signs. I couldn't believe this guy. The quiet kid in the back of the class? How could he have committed a crime such as this?" Well, I remember being a teenager, and when I would misbehave, I wouldn't be punished for it. People are just like, "Oh, what?" They're just confused because they didn't expect this behavior out of me, even though I was a deviant. I did a lot of bad things when I was a teenager, but I wasn't regularly punished for it in school because they just had this preconceived notion, not only about me, but about anybody who behaved that way, that they expect some people to be good kids and some people to be bad kids. And when some of the good kids start misbehaving, they just don't know what to do. They get genuinely perplexed and they just shut down. By they, I mean the teachers mostly, other administrators in schools, so to speak. And those comments aren't specifically related to me. It's just something that happens from time to time. It happens very frequently. It's almost like the common cold. But Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer who was reported to have experienced this exact type of behaviors where he would do very deviant things, way more deviant than I would, like, just genuinely naughty and problematic behavior. And he got a free pass so many times from people in school because they just thought of him as a nice kid and a good kid. It happens so much. And Ed Edward Cypher says, "There's a fantastic documentary called Insane Not Crazy, an HBO documentary about Bundy, and I think a few others. It's brilliant. I'll add that to my list. When I'm back in America, I will be watching a lot more HBO Max. I'm coming to you from the Philippines, of course." Mr. Black Nasty says, "Humboldt County, Eureka, California." Of course, Humboldt State, right? Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, "Hello, Snoopy." Hello to you too, Jerome. And Jerome, I look forward to the interview that's going to be coming out on the channel, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, with Jerry Buting, the former defense attorney for Stephen Avery, who's the subject of Making a Murderer. And Jerry Buting is featured frequently in Making a Murderer, and he is also the author of the book Illusion of Justice. Now, Ed Edwards says, "I've read two things on Ed Edwards. Well, three. One in his book, Metamorphosis of a Criminal, MOAC, and there's a website on the Black Dahlia." And, Ed Edwards ciphers, you're here. What's the name of John Cameron's book that he wrote specifically about Ed Edwards? I would love to do that. And still, at some point in the future, guys, I'm probably going to have to do that larger episode just called Serial Killer Edward Wayne Edwards. Not even so much focusing purely on the Zodiac Killer aspect of this or the Black Dahlia aspect of this, just looking at Ed Edwards with a true crime lens. Charlie says, "I just found Insane Not Crazy. You could get it with a VPN, Ned." Perhaps I can, but I'd have to download the VPN. And ExpressVPN's the best one, but that costs like $100 a year. And anyway, looking at some other stories. This episode is called The Dark Side of Humanity. And I told you guys I was watching a lot of Radio Reddit. One story that they just happened to bring up was a documentary called Dear Zachary. The focus of the Radio Reddit episode was, what are some dark secrets of your hometown? And somebody said that the woman from Dear Zachary lived in her hometown. Wow, that came out of nowhere. There was this giant air bubble in my throat. No, normally you expect it. That time I didn't. But yes, I was watching this, and they say that the woman from Dear Zachary lived in her hometown. And I had never heard of this film before. So I got on YouTube, and it turned out that it was there. It's about an 80-minute documentary. And I will tell you that it challenges everything. Everything you think or feel, anything that is sacred to you, will be challenged by something like this. Thanks, Snoop. And there are a lot of beliefs that people have about human life. There are a lot of beliefs that people have about the pillars of society, pillars of security that are supposed to keep you safe. All of this stuff is challenged in the documentary Dear Zachary. And I know I'm going to give away some of the things, and it probably won't have a big dramatic effect on you if you haven't seen it yet. But because this is True Crime Talk Radio, the documentary Dear Zachary talks about the murder of an individual named Andrew and his son named Zachary, whose last name was Turner. Zachary Turner was the son of Shirley Turner, Andrew's girlfriend. And what happened was this woman, Dr. Shirley Turner, murdered the man in her life, Andrew, the father of her child, and she murdered him. She was awaiting trial. But the problem was she was a Canadian citizen, so she went back to Canada. And she's more or less tried to do the whole legal battles and the legal system going through the channel so she can't be extradited back to the United States to face trial for the murder. One of Andrew's best friends decided to make this movie called Dear Zachary. So he's just sending a letter to his son, to Andrew's son, the son of the murdered man. All right, this is what your father was like when he was growing up. I, had all these personal experiences with him. This is what your father's friends said about him. Everybody loved this guy. He's making this film as a project for the son. Then, about halfway through the film, the entire screen goes red, and then you just learn the devastating truth. Not only did the ex-lover murder her partner, she also committed suicide and took her own life. And prior to that, she also murdered her son. And she murdered Zachary Turner by taking him, sedating him with some type of drug, and then she wrapped him in a sweater around her body, and she jumped into the waters off the coast of Canada, and they both drowned. She was also under the influence of drugs. And I said, it challenges everything, because it's not only the fact that the mother murdered her partner out of a revenge act because she didn't want him to leave her. It's not only because the mother murdered her child as a revenge act on society. It's because all of the warning signs were there. This was somebody who had 8 restraining orders on her. This was somebody who had attempted suicide multiple times, yet she was allowed to be released on bail. She was not under any type of supervision. People allowed her to just walk freely and commit another murder. It challenges a lot of things. Charlie says, I saw that one. It's so heartbreaking, yes. And Dark Side of the Moon also saw Dear Zachary. Crimes like that are preventable. And the family of Zachary Turner, his grandparents, actually went on to participate frequently in the documentary. The grandfather wrote a book called Dance with the Devil, and they are more or less activists for victim advocates. And you really just have to wonder about all the things that society is hiding from us. And Ed Edwards says, I may need to ask you some questions about the Black Dahlia. Shoot, Ed Edwards. This is True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. You can put anything you want in the comments section or the live chat. And Charlie says, I remember seeing a video of her interacting with her son. So disturbing. All right, so in the documentary Dear Zachary, as I said, the woman who murdered her son was named Shirley Turner. She was a medical doctor, nonetheless, Dr. Shirley Turner. And what happened was she had a naturally cold presence to her because they had all of this video footage. And as I said, because they were making this documentary called Dear Zachary prior to the murder, they're just filming this stuff to do something heartwarming as, a way for Zachary to remember his father. One of the most bizarre aspects of this was that the grandparents, the father and the mother of the murdered man, were just deciding that, hey, our son's been murdered. We want to have his child in our lives. We want custody of our grandson, but they didn't have a right to that yet. So what they had to do was they had to participate in supervised visits with the mother who killed their son, and of course a social worker or someone who works a similar profession. But they have to just sit in the same room with the woman who murdered their son and so they can spend time with their grandson. And when you see Zachary Turner on film, he's extremely warm and receptive to the grandmother and does not want to walk toward his mother, Shirley Turner. So this is an example of the bizarre interactions that she had with her son. And one of the big problems with this documentary is they talk about a particular warning sign of the destructive behavior that Shirley Turner was about to commit. And they said she had an extremely bizarre, sometimes profane, and sometimes obscene sense of humor, to the point where it bothered people. And they're just like, what? What's going on with her? And I think that that just does a disservice to people who are actually trying to be funny. And I'm not making light of anything. I just wanted to point out that I don't think there should be limits on comedy. I don't think there should be limits on humor. I think perhaps anything can be funny if it's done in the exact particular light. But so many people out there just use that opportunity, and they use that right of free speech and freedom of expression to do things that are just destructive. And that's a real shame, just abusing the situation. Ed Edward Cyphers is here and he says, I don't know how many did ciphers. I only studied one. Ed Edwards. I've had success in finding his ciphers, not others. Not interested, really. Well, Ed Edward Cyphers, do you mean that you've not looked into the Zodiac Killer ciphers, or is there something else that you'd like to share? Haynes Anthony says, many mob hitmen can be considered serial killers, question mark. Haynes Anthony, no, I wouldn't consider mob hitmen serial killers for the following reason. On this channel, I use the definition of a serial killer committing 3 or more murders with a cooling off period or a return to normalcy. And murder has to be the primary function. Whereas if somebody is a hitman, they've been hired to do this by definition. They're doing it for profit. They're doing it because it's a job, not because murder is the intent that's in their heart or brain, so to speak. So I wouldn't consider them. An exception to this might be Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, who apparently was a hitman, but he also committed murders on his own accord and by his own volition. And this was very big during the discussions on the Serial Killer podcast hosted by Thomas Viborg Thune, where people said, hey, you're hosting this show called the Serial Killer podcast, yet you did a 5-part series about Richard Kuklinski called the Iceman Saga. Now, why would you do that if he wasn't really a serial killer? He's a hitman. And that was just his explanation, that he committed murders where they weren't part of his contract killings or anything to do with any type of hitman job. And there's even another problem with Richard Kuklinski's story, and that is that we don't know if everything that he was saying was true. He tied up a guy in the snow and left him to be eaten by sewer rats. He was driving down the street. He saw somebody on the sidewalk and shot him with a crossbow for no reason. Are those stories really true? Very difficult to corroborate and substantiate. Now, as far as the stories that I'm going through here on this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning, there is one, though, that has come up a lot in the news, and that is the story of Leilani Simon and the murder of her son, Quentin Simon. Following this tradition of the dark side of humanity, the explorations into the dark side of humanity. If you've been watching Court TV at all, or similar programs like Crime Talk, The Law, and Crime Network as well, you've probably seen something about Leilani Simon. She is a woman who apparently went to visit a dumpster late at night and was discarding the remains of her son, Quentin Simon. And she claimed that she just threw everything out that was in her car because her car smelled bad, because she had old expired shrimp pasta in her car. So that's why she was visiting a dumpster at 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing an enormous amount of vibes that are similar of the Casey Anthony story. And these crimes happen time and time again, where the mother views the children as a burden, and she either has them murdered by somebody else or commits the murder herself. And it goes well beyond Casey Anthony, because we also have the story of Brooke Schuyler Richardson, who murdered her daughter Annabelle. Allegedly. She was found not guilty, mind you, because the remains were so badly decomposed that they couldn't determine the cause of death. With Leilani Simon, I think it's a little bit different. Because she discarded her son's remains in a dumpster. The dumpster was picked up by a garbage truck. The garbage truck drove to a landfill. They investigated the landfill because they're following the clues. And it's quite possible that they were able to find her son's remains before they could completely rule out all of these exonerating factors. Because this is the stuff that I always come back to with Casey Anthony. She was found not guilty because they couldn't determine the cause of death to her daughter, Kaylee Marie Anthony. And they were like, if you can't determine the cause of death, how do you know that this person was murdered? Reasonable doubt. With Brooke Schuyler Richardson, it was the same story. They couldn't determine the cause of death, and how can you say that it's murder if you can't determine the cause of death? Reasonable doubt. And I'm hoping that justice will be served in the case of Quentin Simon. And again, it's one that's been widely reported on, although Scott Reich of Crime Talk said that he was expecting that she was going to be found guilty. He thought that it was not exactly a slam dunk case, but at the end of the day, Leilani Simon would be found guilty for either the murder of her son or similar crimes, definitely the improper disposal of human remains, but most likely she would be found guilty of murder. Now, there is another case that has been taking the airwaves by storm, and that is the story of Damina Cherry. Damina Cherry was a girl who was born in Switzerland, and she's often referred to as just Sarah M. in the sources. Her legal name has not been revealed because she's born in Switzerland. Then she goes to Germany, and in Germany they have very strict privacy laws, even involving somebody who has been convicted of murder. And Damina Cherry is one of the other names that she is known by. And she was a teenage girl who developed this infatuation and obsession with serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez. She developed this obsession with them to the point where she wanted to concoct a plan to become a female serial killer. And this has been mentioned on the channels Haley Elizabeth and Coffee House Crime. And I've been following the channel Coffee House Crime for quite some time, giving a shout out to Adrian over there. And he definitely gets people's attention with his presentations. Very popular channel. But one thing I particularly liked about his video on the story of Damina Cherry was that he doesn't just tell you, hey, this is a true crime story, these are the events. He talked about previous cases that he had discussed before on his true crime channel and looking at how this pattern of behavior really isn't that bizarre. There are other stories out there of women who go on to concoct plans because they want to commit murders, copycats, influences, people who have been exposed to outside and external sources that drive them to kill. And are they telling the truth? We'll get to that. But I just appreciated that he showed how his video series on Coffee House Crime is a continuum rather than just a bunch of standalone episodes. This person was born on this date. This is where they live. This is where they moved to. No. Think about everything I just told you about the commonalities in the cases that I mentioned. Leilani Simon, Brooke Schuyler Richardson, Casey Anthony, anybody else who has ever murdered their kids because they thought they were a burden. Darlie Rudier, Diane Downs. This goes on and on. And you see that from men, and you see that from women. Yes, you see stories of men who murder their children because they think they're burdens. Chris Watts, John Emile List, whom I was talking about last week on True Crime Talk Radio. And if you want to follow along with all of these discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can always support this channel on buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88. And you can use the super chats and super thanks here on YouTube. But as far as the story of Damina Cherry, she concocted a plan to become a female serial killer. And in addition to being a fan of Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez, she also developed an infatuation with the Jack the Ripper story, particularly with the Jill the Ripper theory, the idea that Jack the Ripper was a woman and that's how he got away with it. I should rephrase. The idea that the Ripper was a woman and that's how she got away with it. So, she decided to lure a man to a secluded area by talking to him on the internet. He was an immigrant from Iraq named Syed, and she lured him there with the promise of offering some type of sexual favor, and she stabbed him in the neck. She had researched this a lot. What is it going to look like when you stab someone in the neck? What is the blood spatter going to be like? And ultimately, she was caught. However, she was a minor, so they're really trying to just say that she does not even deserve jail time. She just needs 8 years in a psychiatric institution, and she will be rehabilitated and reintroduced into society. But this is not exactly a typical story of somebody who is committing a murder simply because they want to experience what murder is like. This is someone who wanted to be a serial killer, who openly stated that she wanted to be a serial killer, and even saying that there was an additional influence on her choice to commit murder, and that she was inspired by the serial killer Harold Shipman, who is from the UK. He is known as Dr. Death. He is a deceased serial killer, but some people think that he might actually have the highest documented body count of any serial killer in history, murdering over 200 people. Yes, of course, there are stories out there such as Thug Baram from India, who murdered over 931 people, or that's the claim. But all of that is unsubstantiated and unconfirmed. And we have some things here in the chat. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, Ned, I don't remember if you have talked about Ronald DeFeo Jr., the Amityville Horror. No, I haven't, Jerome, but I can do that for a future episode. Cowpoke says, I saw at least one of the law tubers is following the dumpster case gavel to gavel. Was that by chance the one from the Daily Mail? Law tubers, very good names. There has been an explosion in true crime content that is related to the legal cases, the courtrooms. Court TV was very, very big on television, and Court TV has taken YouTube by storm. They put out 5-hour courtroom sessions, the court proceedings, and so on, as does the Law and Crime Network. Crime Talk also does live responses to a lot of things that are going on in the courtroom. Law tubers are just going to get bigger and bigger. I found that true crime content is really shared in a lot of different ways because there's a channel out there called True Crime News. There's a website called True Crime News that has its own podcast. They actually have a couple different hosts who work on the True Crime News podcast. And every Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, I release shorts where I talk to you guys about stories. Most of them are about stories of serial killers, but sometimes I respond to the True Crime News. And I was just thinking that this channel, this podcast, True Crime News, and their website was going to be a plethora of information that I would be discussing with you guys on Black Box Online Radio. But at the same time, a lot of their stories are just like, there was a dispute over marijuana and 2 people were murdered. And they are simply reporting on the facts. They are simply just trying to share the events of true crime stories from around the country. But at the same time, I really found that something was lacking from their presentations. They were not doing the deep dives into the world of the human mind, which is the stuff that I want to explore, to understand what people are doing and why they're doing it, as well as just approaching the challenge of recognizing that there is this dark side of humanity out there. The title of this episode, all right, let's highlight it. Let's get under the surface. Let's not walk away. And in True Crime News, really didn't seem to do that. They're just, telling stories of tragedies, but there wasn't a lot of depth to the stories that they share on their website. There's some other true crime presentations out there that I've also found leave something to be desired. One of them is the channel Crime Talk, as I said, hosted by Scott Reich. He's a very good presenter, but at the same time, they do not necessarily focus on stories that are completely eye-catching. There might be one story within a 40-minute episode that is actually pulling people in, and the rest are not exactly very well put together, although I am no one to talk about that. Charlie says something about Diane Downs, the woman who murdered her kid and claimed that a bushy-haired man was the one who did it. She had 3 children in a car with her, and they were shot. Now, Charlie, it's been a while since I've watched some of those things with Diane Downs, but she said that the bushy-haired man shot them, right? But one of the kids was paralyzed, one was murdered, and one of them was not severely injured. Did I get that right? But she had duper's delight with her smile across her face. Yes, absolutely. If you watch interviews with Diane Downs, she doesn't appear to be bothered at all. It's almost as if she just enjoys being in the spotlight and she's denying everything. Oh, I don't really know. She just is basking in the spotlight. Disgusting. And it's not simply that I think she murdered her children. She was convicted for it. She tried to escape from prison. And some of the evidence they looked at with Diane Downs was that they went through her journals and they found that she was obsessed with a man, but he did not want to be with her because He didn't want a woman with 3 children, so she found a very destructive alternative. And with Leilani Simon, we're most likely going to find out that something very similar is going on. Cowpoke says, Legal Vices is who I remember is following it. Legal Vices, I'm not familiar with that channel, Cowpoke. Now, there is one that I just discovered today called Horror on the Rocks. And it's another thing like Radio Reddit where they talk about a lot of stories of personal experiences. People can write into the channel. And the first episode that I watched from them was done in the old-fashioned radio tradition where they just have one image on the screen, and it's one of those things where the image is kind of floating and moving like a screensaver. And then they were telling all of these stories about dark secrets that people have in their lives, and that was really good. Again, dark side of humanity, explorations into human behavior, and just getting to what people actually do when the doors are closed and nobody is looking. How do people behave then? And then some of their other videos were done in a more quick changing camera angle style presentation. And to be honest, I just like the old fashioned radio versions. And it's that whole saying, keep it simple. There's a reason why I do Black Box Online Radio in this format. There's a reason why I just put it out as a podcast for years, because I think you guys can tell I'm not someone who gets caught up with flashy graphics. The only graphic that I have for this show is Snoopy. Snoopy is amazingly reliable, though, I must say. Charlie says, I used to be addicted to Court TV. Charlie, I think I am now. I didn't watch Court TV for a very long time, and they went away for a while, and they were replaced by True TV, but I suppose that they had a certain type of resurgence. I remember watching Court TV many times as a kid. I often talk to you guys about how I would watch Cops and America's Most Wanted and History Channel documentaries about true crime stories, but Court TV is also something that I grew up with. And Charlie Smith says, just like Susan Smith, a man didn't want the kids. I'm not familiar with the story of Susan Smith. Is there something that you would like to add in the chat, Charlie? And Charlie also says, I'm subbing to so many channels today, even Ed Edwards. Ed Edwards ciphers. I'm going to have to go through everything that you have, because Ed Edwards was a real serial killer. He was a real criminal. And I don't think that anybody doubts that. The question is, what did Ed Edwards actually do? And Ed Edwards ciphers doesn't seem to be a fan of the book 55, The Zodiac Killer Identified by Tim Spencer, but I'm hoping to do something much larger with that one as well. So far, we've talked about a lot of the reasons why people commit crimes and the reasons why people are driven to kill. But they're all simple things. Everything that we have said is just, well, someone didn't like their situation, so they did something bad to change the situation. Murder. And we always have to doubt these wild stories that people are throwing out about how there's like demonic possession and so on. There was a serial killer from America who moved to the Bahamas, and he wanted to commit murders solely targeting Americans. And he goes on to become known as the Angels of Lucifer killer. And the whole time I was reading the story about the Angels of Lucifer killer in the Bahamas, I was just thinking, he's claiming that he's murdering these people because, they're the devil. They've got the devil in them, so on. They're the angels of Lucifer, the fallen angels, right? But at the same time, he's an American who's living in the Bahamas, and he's solely targeting Americans. That shows that he is aware of what he's doing. Back to victim profiling, back to victimology, back to the concept of these people have a self-serving reason, and they try to use a bunch of smoke and mirrors to cover it up. Angels of Lucifer killer. When I did the short episode about him here on Black Box Online Radio, I couldn't even call him that. I called him the Lucifer of the Bahamas because I thought that this Angels of Lucifer story was so obviously fake. And when you look at a murderer like Damina Cherry, who murdered this man because of this obsession with Ted Bundy, an obsession with Richard Ramirez, and she just wants to become a prolific female serial killer, is that really what's going on? No. It's a combination of mental illness partnered with the fact that she had a breakup with her boyfriend that didn't go well. Think about what I said in regards to Ted Bundy. Humiliation and rejection. These are very powerful concepts that affect the human mind and the human brain. And some people are not emotionally equipped for that. And other people are just dealing with dormant homicidal tendencies, dormant sadistic tendencies, issues that are going to drive them to commit these crimes. And that's the thing that just pushes them through the door. They probably had a lot of inclinations to commit violence. They probably had sadistic tendencies to begin with. They probably had emotional instability. And let's not kid ourselves. The mental illness thing is very real. Being mentally ill is, very real. And the reason why people are committing these types of crimes is because they are going to be dealing with something that is neurochemical, something that is physiological. I don't downplay any of that stuff. But the reason why people are often found guilty versus not guilty by mental disease or defect is because they are consciously aware of what they are doing. They have the ability to stop. They have the ability to walk away. And that doesn't appear to be what happens in all of the cases. There was a true crime story that was widely discussed in the news recently, and I did a short about this one called The Apple River Stabbings. And they were committed by a man named Nikolai Mew. And he was out on the Apple River in the northern part of the Midwest, and it was for a day of river tubing with his wife, and a group of teenagers started saying some things to him that bothered him. And there's videography of this where it appears that they are hitting him, but you can't see who hit the person first. So he falls down in the water, and then he emerges holding a knife, and he stabbed multiple people, and he murdered one person. And he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to at least 20 years in prison because they said, even though he felt threatened, he had the ability to walk away. Even though he had this type of confrontation, all he had to do was just say, whatever, and leave. And he didn't do that. Now, there are other cases out there where people use the stand your ground laws. One of them is called the popcorn murder, where a man was sitting behind another man in a movie theater, and the guy in front of him was on his cell phone, talking to a babysitter, actually, but he's on his cell phone nonetheless. And the man behind him asked him to get off his cell phone because the movie was starting. So words were exchanged, confrontation happened, and the guy in the front turned around, threw the phone at him, and hit the man's popcorn out of his face. The guy in the back pulled out a gun and shot him because he said he was afraid, he feared for his life, and he had been assaulted. He claimed self-defense, but he also claimed Florida's stand your ground laws. As I said, the Apple River stabbings were in the northern Midwest. Florida's stand your ground laws, which are very flexible, let's say. And he was found not guilty. And the worst part is, I agree with that. You shoot somebody because they hit the popcorn in your face. Number one, he was assaulted. Number two, he was under the threat of being assaulted further. Number three, he's an elderly man who may have actually been in fear for his life. So he used a firearm, using the Second Amendment, mind you. Absolute tragedy that it went that far. Absolutely saddening that that situation went to that level. But at the same time, I think that that was the correct ruling according to the law. Mike says, it's been 5 years since we've seen him. 5 years ago? And let's see, who are we going to talk about? Oh, is that referring to John Cameron? Ed Edwards Cipher says, read Cameron's book and his website. Yes, John Cameron. I haven't exactly reached out to him in the past. I may have sent him an email once, but I don't think I've heard anything back. I've never had any interaction with John Cameron, the man who accuses Edward Wayne Edwards of being the Zodiac Killer in the Black Dahlia. And, Ed Edwards says that I thought Florida invented it, the stand your ground rules. Sure, they definitely came up a lot with the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, which is one that I'm not an expert on, so I won't comment too much on that one, because these are very technical. They are very technical. Was someone just doing something slightly different? It changes the legal outcome. Right now, I would like to say thank you so much to everybody for listening to this episode on the darker side of humanity. I talked about a lot of the stories that I don't mention frequently on Black Box Online Radio, as well as mentioning some stories that I had never discussed before, such as Prison to Purpose, Damina Cherry, the murder of Quentin Simon, as well as the murder of Zachary Turner. Lots of true crime stories that have not come up here and in the past. But I would like to just give you guys the floor for a second. You can put anything else you want in the chat as this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning is winding down. And Mr. Belgique gives us the thumbs up. Okay, so on Jerome's channel, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, we are doing the panel discussion. So about the Zodiac Killer. One of them just came out recently. As I said, we will be doing the interview with Jerry Buting on Friday. And next week, we're going to do a segment called Let's Talk with Ned on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. And we will be discussing the story of the Freeway Phantom, an unidentified serial killer from the Washington, D.C. area. And if you would like a little bit of a warmer for that one, I have a standalone episode on the Freeway Phantom here on Black Box Online Radio. It's called The Mystery of the Freeway Phantom Psychological Profile. I invite you to check that out. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. As Ryan Burns said so eloquently, you can subscribe to a channel. It's free. And also feel free to check out some of the other sources that I've mentioned in this episode. Of course, you guys know about Court TV and so on, but Coffee House Crime, Haley Elizabeth, lots of things there. And 42 Lehman says, keep up the good work. Hey, thank you so much, 42 Lehman. And everybody, thanks you for listening to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. I'm your host, Black Box Ned, and I'll be signing off. But I will be with you tomorrow to talk about Jack the Ripper, Ripper Wednesday. Until next time.